Oh,
Casey.
oh, hi. Hello.
Yeah, thanks for coming to our little preview event.
Yeah,
Uh,
how's it going?
it's pretty good. It's pretty good. It's fun. We haven't done this format before, so I think it's going to be a fun time. Yeah, and like I introduced, co-founder of Mega Crit Games, co-creator of Slay the Spire. You do a lot of the UX production and creative direction kind of work. Um, yeah, and I guess just to start out, like you want to introduce yourself a bit, talk about maybe your role in Slay the Spire.
Yeah, sure. Um, Hi, I'm Casey Yano, one of the two co-founders of Roguelike Games. I think the first game we published was, I guess, the first and only game we've published so far is Slay the Spire. We're working on another thing right now, but we do a little bit of everything. But I do mostly game client programming, um, art direction. I draw some assets as well. Mainly, I draw all the UI, at least for Slay the Spire, and then I don't know. I have a lot of hats. I'm trying to remember them all.
Yeah,
Right
I know you said something
announcements.
really interesting when we talked earlier, which was that Anthony was kind of the card game guy and you were kind of the roguelike guy.
Yeah,
And I would love to expand on what you mean and how that breakdown kind of worked.
I see. Let's see. I think when initially, so Anthony and I used to work together on games a long, long time ago. During like college, and he was always into like board games and card games. He had he ran a was like working and managing a local game store. It was like really into board games in general. Just he just always did board games. And I did a lot of game testing growing up. That was like my job as well. So we
Oh,
both had
fun.
like kind of like game adjacent jobs. Um, but I was always into more action games than like board games and card games. Um, I just played a lot of like smaller indie titles. I was really into Geometry Wars 2 for a bit. I kind of like the idea of like not memorizing a level. The first game we made together, which was not Megacrit technically, it was a different company we had at the time called Pew Pew Inc. And we made a game called God Laser, which was like this Ikaruga clone. And the pretty much what I thought would be groundbreaking at the time was like instead of spawning enemies from like predetermined locations, we'd be like, oh, maybe it will spawn from like here, or maybe it'll spawn from there, or like the bosses would like randomize which order they'll do their like bullet patterns and stuff like that. So I guess in a way, I was always interested in just like creating things spontaneously,
Yeah,
and at the time there wasn't like a big like word or movement around it. This was back in
right.
2009 or so, maybe
Okay.
before.
So maybe pre some of the like bigger boom of the action-y roguelikes.
Yeah, this was
Yeah.
around, and then like a few years, I guess around that time was maybe when The Binding of Isaac was released, and it was kind of like this big, like rogue light kind of movement kind of started. I was also a big fan of Splunky. I would say like huge inspiration from like Derek Yu in general, just because one of the very few people who was like blogging about like independent game development. Indies on even on Steam were like pretty rare at the time.
Yeah, yeah. Yeah. Interesting. Which then it's fascinating given all of that, that then like Slay the Spire, one of I think the really definitive now card game based roguelikes that I think has even I feel caused a renaissance or at least like a boost. I feel like there's been a lot of card game roguelikes coming out, especially I feel like about the dev lag of like if you started making your card based roguelike when you played Slay the Spire, you've been coming out in the last little
There are
while.
there are a lot of card games now, aren't there?
Yeah.
Um, so I saw Anthony saw an opportunity for deck building games
Mm-hmm.
to be done in like a virtual kind of like video games. And I thought that um, digital card games, the UI of digital card games was really awful.
Mm-hmm.
Um, like cards would just be these static things, and you click on it, and then you click on some area to like play it. You'd like have a hard time reading it, so you'd only be able to play on PC. But then like Hearthstone came along, and it was like, hey, like it can feel sort of like fun to play with cards, even if you're not like handling them in real life. It shouldn't
Yeah.
feel like this like sad secondary mode of play where it's
They were
like, oh,
juicy.
it's like not as good as the real thing. And I was like, it
Juicy
can be better than the
cards.
real thing.
Yeah.
Because you can explain rules dynamically in context.
Right.
We can shuffle for you. We can clarify rules by enforcing them through game, system mechanics, just by programming them. And so I really wanted to like push that as far as possible, while also making sure that like Anthony wanted to make a deck building game, and I was like, oh, this makes sense. I played a little bit of I think everyone at the time has played a little bit of Dominion, and then there was like a spin-off game that was pretty popular called Ascension, I think, and that was like another Dominion like kind of like drafting deck building game. So
Right.
I did both of those as well.
Yeah, I think that's really interesting of the taking advantage of. I remember what I found really cool about Hearthstone, and then is true in Slay the Spire, is all that stuff of you can do strange things to the deck that would be tedious or impossible in a physical board game, or like the level of token management, or something like add damage for every other strike card in your deck is a very like that would be quite a difficult thing to handle. And yeah, which I think that the roguelikeness of the systemic kind of combinations as well of how especially the relics come into it, which I was actually curious like if relics fell more on your side or Anthony's side or a mix, because I feel like they're a very roguelike-y thing almost more than a card gamey thing. Not that I think everything splits into these two categories, but it's interesting to think about.
We used to have more traditional rogue like elements. Actually, we used to have potions that were unidentified, and you had to like use them and figure out what they were.
What?
You could like combine potions, but the potion drops were not very high, just because there's like a lot of monsters and there's already a lot of items on screen. So we ended up kind of like making it simple. Relics used to have 3 slots, and you would choose like 3 powerful ones, and you can mix and match what you want. But we kind of had more fun just designing too many of them, and we were like, well, like if you have too many and we have to like choose between them, it feels bad to get rid of when you have too many excess relics. You don't want to get rid of them. And we're like, why don't we just do what the Binding of Isaac does? And it just kind of like descends into chaos, and like more and more items can trigger off other items, and it's just kind of these cascading event stuff. And that was more of a hit internally when we were playtesting, because we had a internal playtest period of more than a year, I think.
Yeah, I remember actually a GDC talk that I went to about some of the like data gathering and things like that informed development, which is really cool. Was the potion identifying something that also made it out into like more closed or beta type playtesting?
It didn't last very long.
Okay. Because that's fascinating. I've never heard before that there was potion identification in Slay the Spire. That would have really cut through the like, is it a roguelike?
I'm not really sure why we added some of these mechanics or when. It's all a bit of a blur. We're like, is there enough complexity? Like, why don't we try adding? And there was a lot of like try adding kind of like mechanics. And some of them ended up very well, some of them not as well. Another one would be like maps. We didn't used to have a map. It used to just be you just be shown 3 like doors, and then like how the door was ornamented, you would know kind of like what room you would be in next, which is
kind of how Hades does it.
What?
I think that's how Hades does it now. Kind of where you see like, yeah, you have like 3 doors and they have a little icon of what's going to be in them. Yeah,
it's pretty interesting that Hades ended up kind of like using like a similar system that we had. Why we got rid of it, I don't know. I think we just wanted to be able to feel like you were traversing. And in a game that's like mainly static, it's really hard to kind of convey that feeling. Whereas in Hades, you're literally like physically moving around. So like even if you don't have a map, and even then, I guess Supergiant's game also has a map, right? When you beat a boss, your character goes like, doo, 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 and you like.
Oh yeah, which actually always kind of reminds me of the like between acts like ish, like some of the Slay the Spire map stuff.
There's a good feeling of movement in Hades for sure. Better than Slay the Spire actually. But
it is interesting because I think like again in terms of like roguelikeness, like that kind of like dungeon dive feel, it does make sense that that's much harder in a card game because like there isn't a movement stage, which I feel like I've seen some games now that are trying to do more of a like you run around and also play cards, which
a little bit of both.
Yeah. But that is interesting, and it's interesting you mentioned the map because I feel like my observation is that I have now seen other games with maps that I feel like look very like Slay the Spire's map, which again, FTL's planet map also kind of similar, so it's not like no one's ever done it, but it seems like that's another like little lesson that people have taken from it and applied.
Yeah. I would say the map is mostly evolutionary. Like it wasn't created in a vacuum.
Yeah.
I don't remember exactly which games we looked at. We actually looked at a handful of different games when thinking about um, specifically events, the map system, and the enemy's move system. So those three we kind of like studied different games to see what they did before we like kind of like landed on like exactly what we wanted to do. It wasn't something we wrote in like a design document at the very beginning. I think the design document was like 2 pages, very short. It was like deck building, classes,
Yeah.
monsters, yeah, like that.
Uh-huh.
We figured out like the pacing, the maps, potions, relics, the different types of nodes in those maps. Those were all kind of created organically while we were building it.
Which is really interesting. Like I don't know what level of trying to rack your brain is useful, but like from a programming, almost like a technical standpoint, like that's a lot of flexibility of like iterating on all these different concepts. Were there any particular approaches that helped make that possible, that you could add and remove stuff that fast when you were prototyping?
That's a good question. I just kind of write shitty code. I just don't. I'm just not afraid of like
It's
losing
honest.
anything that I write. I
Yeah.
just write just crap. Nothing is like reliant on something else. And if something is, I just remove it and then I just fix all the bugs. I'm just kind of chaotic in terms of programming. It's not really recommended for teams that are larger than 2 people, I would say. But so it worked for us, I guess. Uh, so a lot of those systems, like they came and went in less than a week.
Wow.
We converted we had like a move system where the enemies describe what they did, and then they had a series of actions. But then we made it so that we got little icons above the enemies. Like that took about a week, which is, I guess, pretty long. That was probably the biggest overhaul.
Hmm.
Writing a map, we just were like, let's use this algorithm, and then we like put something up there, and it's just like an image with a few like tick boxes. And while it was kind of crappy at the start, we would still iterate over a long period of time. It's like, oh, maybe we should have 5 branches at the start, or like 4 branches. Maybe instead of 17 floors, we should go down to 16 floors. And eventually it became 13 floors. Just one at a time, just shorter and shorter. We're like, kind of getting tired of playing Act 1 over and over again.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah. Yeah, which is really interesting. Was there like a cadence to like, okay, we've put in a bunch of features, we've written a bunch of shitty code, let's like take a little bit to get the code less shitty? Or was it just kind of ad hoc, like always balancing the two? Or was there a moment at the end where you were like, oh no?
when you write a lot of bad code, sometimes when you're making content in that system, you're like, this isn't gonna work. I guess we'll take a little bit of time to actually fix the code. So there are like kind of fix things as we run into them. And I think you just want to make sure that you have like really well written functions, and those kind of like methods are just like named after the actual game things. So it's like, oh, this is like an elite room. You're like, oh, this is a room where elites are.
Yeah.
We try not to name things like strong monster, Q attach your bootstrapper, and we're like, okay, we don't know what that means anymore.
Yeah, that's interesting. That's one thing I noticed when I did some stuff in the NetHack code. I was impressed. They do the terrible thing of the time because of screen space that they drop like all the vowels from all variable names for space. But other than that, function names and stuff tend to be really descriptive of what they do in a way that makes the code more readable. So that is really interesting. There's one question from Travis of like all these different kind of trying it out things. Like how long would you try and iterate on a feature and kind of like give it a go before deciding either, okay, we're going to codify this, we're going with it, or we're dropping it?
We would just play one run, and I think and if it doesn't feel like it's going to work, we just kind of axe it. We don't like leave it in there for months.
How do you get that decisive?
You know when you like paint something and you're like, does this look good? And then the next day you look at it and you're like, nah. It's kind of like that kind of like guttural feeling. Not guttural, gut feeling, excuse me. And we're like, it doesn't work. And
Wow.
Anthony and I are really harsh like editors against each other. Um, we'd be like, hey, like this system might work. And I'd be like, I don't think so. I think it's gonna suck. And you're like, well, we should just try it. And I was like, all right, well, I'm gonna write it shitty. And then I just throw it in there, and we have an enemy that like eats your cards, or like suddenly your character grows horns. And I was like, I don't think this is worth it. Or like maybe it's awesome and it stays.
Yeah. That's interesting. Do you think that's one where it helps that you've known each other for longer? That it's not like you're not
Yeah.
you didn't just get together for the project and it's some random person telling you, I think your ideas aren't worth it.
Yeah, I guess that's a good point. Like Anthony and I have known each other for quite a long time, and we also have just played a lot of games together. And so when we kind of like critique games, we kind of already know what we're going to say. Like when we boot up a game and it's loud, we're like, why isn't the master at 50% when you launch the game? Like, why isn't the master and the background music and SFX at 50? Like, then you can go up or down. Like, why would you start at 100? Like, that's ridiculous. My ears are gonna die. It's like a
Is that
very
how you
common thing.
relax? You just bring up other things and critique. It's kind of like a Mystery Science Theater 3000, but just like on games for fun.
Yeah, I mean, to this day, we still play games, and we're like this isn't gonna work. Or like, oh, this looks like it borrowed, idea from this game, or maybe this game is still the same in like the series. What's a good example? Let's see. I think Anthony wanted to try out Tiny Tina's Wonderlands. That's like the Borderlands spiritual sequel to 3 or something. And it's like, and I was like watching the trailer, and I was extremely skeptical. I was like, this is exactly like Borderlands, except like different classes. And they're like, I don't know, because when it's been a while since you've played a certain type of game, you're just like, this time it's gonna be different. He starts playing it, and I'm like, I knew it's the same game. I'm not joining you on this co-op game.
You're done. No,
Done.
not worth
I mean,
it.
if you've never played a Borderlands game, you can start there. It's still fun, sure. But
yeah, they have 1 billion guns.
there's a lot of guns. The guns are very fun.
Yeah.
Their writing is, if that's your style, that's cool.
Yeah. Almost speaking of fun guns, not exactly. We have a question from one classy dude. Some people have upvoted. Do you have a favorite card or any particular memorable like discoveries in the game from you as a developer or people playing where it's like, oh, I didn't expect this combo would happen? And like, can you boil it down to a favorite card?
Oh, boiling it down to a favorite card. Let's see. I like wacky cards, but I also am just like a really big fan of cards that have like a specific purpose and are clean. My favorite card is Bash, by the way.
Okay.
It's very pure, because if you play a Bash, the next turn you play 2 strikes and it's worth it. It's worth the cost of the Bash. You do a little bit more damage. It's so elegant. And it's a starter card, so like the starter cards have to be like on point.
Right.
Otherwise, it's like, oh, this is the card I'm going to remove immediately when I start playing. Or it's the card I'm always going to upgrade. Like, you have to have it like just right for that one card that is not the strikes and defense. And so I would say,
I feel like this must be key because I play a lot of Slay the Spire and I've gotten way further in Ascension in every class except Ironclad, and I also almost always like get rid of Bash from my deck. So I'm learning. Yeah, I'm throwing out Casey Yano's favorite card every time.
It doesn't mean that it is the strongest. Some cards upgrade substantially well than they should.
Well, I don't do great at Ironclad comparatively, so I think more I have something to learn. Do you have any favorite cards that got cut, or like favorite things from all those like give it a try?
It's hard for me to know what I have added or haven't added, just because I worked on other card games as well. So I forget which game is which at this point. It's kind of just like, and also we cut more than half the cards that we make.
Wow.
Because cards are just really easy to make. You're like, it does this and this and this, except for the super complex ones. But generally, it's like, let's just try adding a bunch of like vanilla and French vanilla cards. That's just like things that are very pure and things that are slightly impure. And then like we want to make sure there's some cards that are like weird.
Yeah.
But if you have too much weird things, then you're like kind of like overthinking every turn, and then it's like it's kind of like really thinky to play, so you don't get in a good flow state. So you kind of have to balance it out. I forgot the question. Kind of went into my own.
I mean, and I want to note, so French vanilla is a term for like it's pretty basic, but it's a little bit special.
That's what Anthony tells me.
I
He's
like
into
that.
Magic, so he tells me French vanilla cards are like cards that are
it's
like
Magic.
very basic, but a little bit different. Like,
Fascinating.
made up of like a keyword or something.
I've never heard that before, and I want to steal it. That's new.
That's fine because I
terminology.
stole it.
Yeah, it's just a chain. Who knows who Anthony stole it from?
I mean,
it probably goes back to Rome. Yeah.
I'm not a card game person. I mean, I'm a little bit of a card game person now, but like compared to Anthony, you know.
Yeah. Slay the Spire dev. Not a card game person.
Not a card game person. That's sort of my tagline whenever somebody's like, "How did you think of this game?" And I'm like, "I didn't."
Amazing. I was so glad that like I got that heads up early. I was like, well, all the questions about card games, delete. No.
I mean, you can ask me, but like, you know, I still make a lot of content. I love making content, even in card games. I think seeing the foundation of like a game and then making content that fits into it is it's just a very good design exercise, whether you are into that genre or not, right?
Yeah.
Like you're playing a game of Slay the Spire and you're like, I wish I could do XYZ. And then you're like, oh, how do I work backwards to make sure this unusual strategy will work out? Something that didn't work out here is like what if we could have a character who thrives on having low HP? So there's cards that are like, oh, like if your HP is less than half, this card is stronger or something like that. It's like a very pure, like berserker type build archetype that you would see in all sorts of games. Didn't really work for Slay the Spire. We have some like remnants of that kind of archetype in there a little bit. But
yeah,
you're kind of towing the line a little too much.
Is that kind of, and because I feel like this applies to card games, but would apply to other games as well in terms of that, like content versus rules of, do you go back and forth or do you find one works better than the other in terms of saying like, I want to try and have a character build that is thriving on having low health, and so I'm going to make content for that, versus I've come up with a piece of content of like, what if I had this bonus if my health was below half? Oh, cool. Like now let's try and build this back into a bigger feature. Like which direction?
I see. Yeah, I think I sort of start at the goal because then it's a little more clear to like shape and form something that'll have the player kind of funnel into that kind of idea. And then players get kind of that aha moment, like, oh, like this is a possible strategy. Like, oh, we have this very unusual relic that you can like play status cards from your hand. And then we have another relic that's like, if you play 5 cards, it deals 3 damage to all enemies or something like that. And it's like, oh, this is a very strange combination, but it can happen in a very, very rare case. Whenever we make something, we make sure that those cases might happen. And if they have no interesting interaction, we're like, why are we forcing the player to play in a way that is not very interesting? And so no matter how good something is, if it's a little boring or doesn't work with anything, we want to get rid of it.
Yeah. How do you keep track of that? Do you just have like your big Rolodex of all cards and relics and everything, and you just stare at it all until you're like, yes, I see this combination?
We play 2 or 3 runs a week. We just play a lot. Because if you play a game a lot, you kind of start having this like next level conversation of like, instead of talking about the mechanics, you start talking about the possibility space. And when you talk about the possibility space, and you're also the developer of that game, then you can make those possibility spaces come true. And I think that's extremely important.
Yeah.
Maybe in a bigger production where someone's like a designer and someone's like the person implementing it and someone's the person testing it. It's like, how does it all come full circle so that you can make more and more interesting little like, I like to call them moments of delight. So we want to have moments of delight happening, just want to spark joy, right?
Yeah. So, the Marie Kondo method of game development.
It kind of is like that, yeah. I think about Super Smash Brothers a lot because it's like a series of systems where like chaos can happen. In the same way, that's sort of what roguelikes are about, I think, is like you have all these levers that are chaotic, and then sometimes something very unusual can happen. Like maybe you're gonna lay an egg, and then for some reason you're a robot. So like it's like, what happens to the egg? Like what's gonna be born out of the egg? You're a robot. Like I don't get it. But sometimes the developer didn't account for it, and you get a
Yeah.
robot dragon. Like, who knows? Whatever.
Just like in Super Smash Brothers.
Just like in Super Smash Brothers, where you just throw out a few hitboxes and you tech off the wall, and who knows? Maybe you're gonna land in a weird way. Maybe you're gonna win.
Yeah. No, I think that's really interesting, and I like how much you're mentioning, because I was curious, like, what types of games act as inspiration for you, and even like outside of games, like sources of inspiration. Like, is it mostly coming from games and game stuff, or is there anything outside of games that you feel like you kind of bring into work?
Outside of games, I mean, at the time, my main hobbies were always, I guess it still is just climbing and cooking. Do a lot of climbing and cooking. I like climbing a lot because you sort of make incremental progress, and then when you climb stuff, the routes that are set are changed by setters. If you climb outside, obviously the rocks aren't changed, but indoor climbing, there are people who are literally like level designers. They're just trying to make all sorts of like weird like combinations of like holds so you can climb in a fun way, and they're like color coded. They try to have good UX so you don't like fall onto another person. um so I would say I'm always thinking about like design and why something is more satisfying or not satisfying, because even in like climbing you can just have like one move to like climb something and you're like, yeah, it's like, wait, that's not very satisfying. That's just like a luck based weird jump that I have to do. Or it can be like a really long, grueling cardio thing, and you're like, okay, maybe I needed that for my exercise.
Yeah,
They all have different goals in mind, I think.
that was really interesting, and I love especially seeing it as a UX thing, which I have heard as well. I have not done a lot of rock climbing, but I think one of the things I've heard multiple people say is that like UX element of there is kind of this readability to it in its own language, which I think is cool, because I think like different games get their own languages and different genres, but I think that Slay the Spire has a very like specific and consistent language in terms of how it gets across effects, and yeah, like card games wise, like I love that about digital card games. If I have mostly a hard time memorizing a whole bunch of different effects and things like that, and so the ability to hover over and just like get those reminders whenever you need them is fantastic.
Thank you.
Yeah.
That's my proudest thing, is just having tips.
Yeah.
We used to have a timer which made it show up after a second because we thought it might be annoying, but then it was more annoying to wait because we have bad memory. We're like, what does it do? I have to wait a whole second to find out.
Right. So. Yeah. Do you think that there's anything else that other developers and roguelikes and things like that could maybe be learning from in Slay the Spire, or be taking kind of things you love? Like I mentioned, I think we see a lot of card game stuff. I think that the map, I see versions that look to me like they were inspired even more. But is there anything else that sometimes you're playing other games out there, and even games maybe from people who are like, we love Slay the Spire, you're like, oh, I wish more people would be learning this thing that we did really well?
I see. I think there just needs to be more stuff. That's how I feel. I like content dense games in general, just because all sorts of unusual situations can happen. And I feel like you kind of have to hit like a tipping point of like content, and then the game becomes sort of unpredictable, even to the developer. And I remember hitting that tipping point, and Anthony and I would be like, "We're gonna play the game. Like, I wonder what kind of build we're gonna get." When that language starts showing up organically, I think that's sort of like you just started hitting that tipping point of adding content into your game. And I feel like a lot of games that I play right now, kind of like, especially roguelites, release into early access before hitting that tipping point. And you know that because if you play a game and you're like, I'm going to do a spear build, and if you're going to do a spear build, that means the game isn't chaotic enough to be like, hey, like maybe we're kind of accidentally guiding you into like a punchy build. But it's like, if everyone's like, oh, I'm always going to go do XYZ build, that means, there's probably not enough randomization.
Yeah.
So that's my, I don't even know if it's good advice. That's my advice for roguelike games right now.
I think it's interesting. I feel like it combines to me with what we talked about a lot of, like the way that you have that decisiveness in kind of cutting things down, because I think that that's the avoiding of like the oatmeal-y problem of, I think, you can have lots of stuff, but it all needs to be at a level of like quality and working. If you have lots of stuff, but then too much of it is, not as interesting. But I think that my guess, from just having this conversation is that I see a lot of combination between those ideas of like the way that you cut things down so much, but then you can build up like tons of stuff. So you get this like high quality bar of everything that's in there is really good, and there's lots of it.
Yeah. Make stuff, cut stuff, and have fun. Gotta play your game. Gotta play your games. Everyone's gotta play their games.
Play games. I like, what is it? Make stuff, cut stuff. What was the last one?
Cut stuff. Play stuff.
Play stuff?
Yeah. Test stuff. I don't know.
Test stuff. Enjoy stuff. Excellent. Well, thank you so much. That time went by very quickly, to me at least. Hopefully to everyone else.
It's great talking.
Yeah.
If there's any follow-up questions?
Yeah,
and so on the internet, kind of a problem, but it's the pandemic, so
yeah. And if you are in the social space, Casey, we have the which is the room assignment. Kawa, you're in the back end. What's the room assignment? Is it in my notes? It is in my notes. It's Mage. So if you're around, or if other people are around that want to, like, after the Subset Games talk, want to just like hang out and talk Slay the Spire, we have from the theater the Mage breakout room. That's the kind of like loosely assigned one for this. So if you're around, Casey, and want to hang out in ASCII space with us, then cool.
I'll
but
try
if
to
not,
find it and hang out a little bit.
Okay, sounds great. Awesome. Well, thank you so much.
Thank you.